Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Destiny Pharma PLC audited results for the year ending 31st December 2020 investor presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we will notify you by email when these are ready for you to review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll. I would now like to hand you over to Neil Clark, CEO, and Neil Claydon, CFO. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. So thank you for joining this presentation. We'll just may turn off cameras during the talk just to protect broadband capacity. So introducing Destiny Pharma, we are developing novel medicines that prevent serious infections. So this presentation is a investor presentation that we're using to talk around our 2020 financial results, which Sean Claydon, our CFO, obviously will cover, but also we can give a short presentation as well on the operations and assets of the company. And it's a very exciting stage for Destiny Pharma, as those of you who follow the company will no doubt have seen prior to the preliminary results, which we announced in April. Just at the end of March, we announced very strong phase 2 data from our clinical program with XF73, which we will cover again in this presentation. It's just moving through the disclaimer slide. And just revisiting, our plan. We have an ambitious 5-year plan to build a larger, vibrant company in this space, developing new treatments to prevent infection. And obviously, to really generate the value there, we need to be at the clinical stage, which we are. And we've brought through clinical assets from our existing home-developed XF platform, as well as assets we've acquired, which we'll cover later in the presentation. But we do want to build a bigger company in this space. The backdrop of COVID has highlighted yet again the urgent need for better, higher quality infection treatments, both viral and bacterial, and Destiny Pharma is at the forefront of that development. But we do have a focus on medicines for hospitals, care homes. And as I said, we have two platforms, really. We have our XF platform, which is our own intellectual property we've developed, but also two biotherapeutic assets, which are moving us into the world of the microbiome as we grow the company's R&D platform. We've shown we can expand through in-licensing, and down the track there could well be opportunities for M&A activity. As I said, it's all done with the idea of building value and creating a larger specialized company in this space. And at the right time, our strategy as an R&D company is to secure partnerships. We have a partner in China, and earlier this year, we appointed a chief business officer, and we'll continue to look for partnerships to complete at the right time. As I said, the backdrop to this whole area of infectious disease, it's fair to say, it's perhaps been neglected since the 1970s, last century. But there are obviously, as we're aware, COVID-19 has highlighted the threat of untreatable infections. And yes, that's a virus, but also many of the respiratory viral infections caused by COVID-19 are associated with bacterial infections. And these need to be treated, of course, with antibacterials. And it's highlighted again the problems here. Of course, the other healthcare concern, which is of global importance, is antimicrobial resistance. So it's one thing being able to treat, say, bacterial infections, but what you don't want to do is to generate resistant superbugs who can then run riot and cause very serious infections, which of course are poorly or impossible to treat because of their highly resistant profile. So we're addressing that with our platform. On the right hand side in this slide is, there's government support here through regulatory actions in the US, UK, and indeed now in Europe. There's a new AMR Action Fund, a $1 billion fund set up by pharma companies to invest in clinical phase companies and other activities in this space, which lead with the investor support we've had, as seen by our funding round we completed last December, that there's increased interest in support from various key players in this whole area. And again, Destiny is at the forefront of companies who are developing new projects that meet these clear needs. And what we have 2 clinical assets which completed their phase 2 programs and are heading towards phase 3s. XF73 is from our own pipeline to prevent post-surgical infections caused by Staphylococcus aureus, such as MRSA. And the new asset we brought in last autumn, NTCDM3, is a naturally occurring bacterial spore which can be used to prevent the recurrence of Clostridioides difficile infections, which is a nasty gut infection which leads to multiple episodes of diarrhea and can cause high numbers of deaths. 29,000 deaths in the US are recorded as a result of C. diff infections. So 2 well-positioned assets with clear clinical opportunities. There's a clear need for new products and also really good commercial prospects, and that of course will drive the valuation and the eventual revenue returns back to Destiny Pharma. Also an earlier pipeline, including our own COVID project and some earlier grant-funded programs with the XF drugs. So a vibrant pipeline, and as Sean will cover, a decent financing position, money through to the end of 22. And in terms of the pipeline, you'll see here in orange are 2 biotherapeutic assets, NTCDM3, which is obviously the most advanced program we have, which is heading towards phase 3s. We're looking to start the phase 3s in 2022. It's only 1 phase 3 study is required. And then XF73 nasal, where we've just received at the end of last month great phase 2 data, and we're now in discussions with regulators to develop the phase 3 plan for that program, and we'll announce that in due course later this year. But what you'll see is XF73 hopefully will catch up with NTCDM3 by the end of the year, and we obviously have here great opportunity to be starting 2 phase 3 programs in 2022, which is a fantastic opportunity for any biotechnology company. The XF73 dermal program is supported by a grant from an expert US government institution called NIAID. So really excited to have that grant awarded earlier this year, and we're pushing ahead with that program. Our Sporkov program, as you said, that's also grant funded, £800,000 grant from Innovate UK, and then earlier projects which are moving forward, and in due course we're hopeful they also will develop 1 or 2 new clinical candidates to take into clinical studies. So I was going to hand over to Sean now, because this presentation really is obviously also focusing on our financial performance. So Sean, please, I'll turn the slides and let me know when you want me to change. Yeah, I think you're on mute, Sean, if you're talking.
If we quickly look at our P&L for the year ended 31st December 2020, we increased pre-tax loss by around £1 million over prior year to 6.5 million. And most of that loss really comes from our R&D spend, which comprises the majority of our costs. And we increased our R&D spend during the year to 4.5 million. And that was largely associated with the phase 2 study for our XF73 program, which Neil mentioned earlier, and where we completed patient recruitment by the end of the year and then had very successful data read out in March of this year. The other component of our costs are overheads, which remained relatively flat at around just under 2 million compared to prior year. We did have some reduction in overheads as a result of reduced activity levels brought about by COVID-19. However, they were broadly offset by one-off deal costs associated with the acquisition of NTCDM3. Turn to the balance sheet. We managed to strengthen the balance sheet during the year through the equity finance in November of just over 10 million gross to fund the acquisition of NTCDM3. And of that fundraise, around 9.9 million net funds to the company. 2.3 million approximately was used to make the first upfront payment to NTCDM3, and that was recognised as an intangible in the balance sheet there in non-current assets. The balance of the fundraise was added to our existing cash reserves, and that enabled us to have a very strong cash position at the year end, just under £10 million in the bank. And as Neil mentioned earlier, that gives the company a very healthy position to be in terms of funding, our current activities through this year and well into 2022.
Thanks, Sean. So just coming back now to the pipeline, and obviously XS73, which reported the great phase 2 data just at the end of last month. This is looking to kill the Staphylococcus aureus in the nose that basically resides there in a third of the world. A third of people are carriers of Staph aureus in the nose, and if you are a carrier, you have a 10 times greater risk of a post-surgical infection caused by that bacteria. An example of which, of course, is MRSA, which is historically and still been a major concern. And the impact of MRSA infections and the sort of cross-contamination is a significant worry, and when it happens, a high cost. The cost, obviously, of the hospitals of having to manage the outbreak, but also, of course, the impact for the patient who's trying to recover from a serious operation. The last thing you want is an infection on top of that, delaying the recovery and in many cases causing other complications. So a large potential market driven by the increasing numbers of serious operations across the world. We focus on the US. We're working under an IND from the FDA, so we do have a sort of priority and a natural pull towards that US market, but it builds up to being a very significant market, potentially peak sales of $1 billion, and that's with sensible pricing of our product. We obviously are looking carefully at price positioning with all of our pipeline assets, and it's important for us to have products that can be sensibly priced. Obviously, we want to get a commercial return, but we don't want to have products that are very, very expensive, which limits their uptake. So XS73, there's a clear clinical need, and the cost benefit of obviously preventing these infections is well established, and a key driver, we believe, in the product and its potential update when we eventually launch it. So it comes from our XF platform, which has been sort of discovered and patented by the company, led by our Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Bill Love. And it's historically, over the years, demonstrated that very effective, fast kill of bacteria. Not all bacteria, but all gram-positives, certain gram-negatives, bacteria hiding in biofilms, all growth phases. So a really potent compound, and has been taken forward in this sort of nasal gel formulation in this lead program for this nasal decolonization, as it's called, of Staph aureus. And the phase 2b has been reported recently, and we're now moving forward to look at phase 3 studies. Just revisiting that efficacy data. So this was a comparison of patients going in for heart surgeries. They were all carriers of Staph aureus in the nose. Some were given our nasal gel, some were given placebo, and you're sort of recording a before and after count of the bacteria in the nose. And what we see with XS73 is a sort of a massive 99.5% reduction in this nasal carriage, which means the patients on XS73 went into the surgery. They were all cut open with really very, very few bacteria in the nose, which of course reduces the risk of those bacteria causing infections. Whereas on placebo, there was a very small placebo effect, but the difference between XS73 and placebo was huge. If you look at the p-value, 0.00001 is a very, very significant result. So great clinical data, not only statistically good, but also clinically relevant. What you're doing here in this study is showing that XS73 kills almost all of the Staph aureus in the nose prior to surgery, and that's what you want to do. You want people going into surgery when they're cut open, when they're at risk, having very, very low levels, or ideally no Staph aureus in the nose. And this chart here on the next slide tries to demonstrate this. You'll see that the drop in the red line of the rapid reductions is over 24 hours, 3 doses of XS73, basically 99.5% removal of the dangerous Staph aureus in the nose. Placebo, a minimal effect, not relevant. So great data. And with this data, and of course other information we've assembled over the years, we now have discussions with regulators on the next steps. And this includes obviously discussing phase 3 designs, I said initially with the FDA, but we'll also look at possibilities for Europe and the UK. And we're looking to start that study in the second half of 2022. And it's a great position to be in as a biotech company. The company was listed back in the autumn of 2017, and the primary story at the listing, as it were, as we spoke to investors then, was to raise money to complete this phase 2 study. So over the 3 years that it's taken us since then to complete the study and now deliver results, it's a great achievement to have actually delivered exactly what we set out to do. Obviously plenty more to do, but what a great position to be in as a clinical stage biotech company. And as this slide here shows, slide 14 in my presentation, we're ticking boxes here. Obviously, there's a broad set of attributes we want from our eventual product. It's called the target product profile. Easy to apply, safe gel. Yes, we've got that. It's a non-irritant, very safe. No side effects. That's great. It acts really fast, so it's very quick in terms of killing the bacteria. In this case, Staph aureus, we want to kill. One of the competitor products, probably the only competitor really, is an old antibiotic called mupirocin. That has to be given 5 days before surgery, and also has big problems with antimicrobial resistance, and is also a mild irritant. So in many ways, XF73 is a better product than mupirocin. And one of the key assets, of course, of the XF's platform and XF73 is that we address the threat of AMR, because the XF73 nasal gel does not deliver resistance, and of course that means we're not generating superbugs, so that enables us to address this global concern of AMR and be used more widely, whereas mupirocin, its use is limited due to the major problems it has with well-established problems with generation of resistant strains of Staph aureus. So XF73 is really delivering on building this target product profile, and of course delivering more data from phase 3 studies is our plan, and we'll announce further news on that later in the year. We're now coming to our other clinical asset, the one we acquired the deal was actually sort of completed with the funding in early December. This is called NTCD. So the NT stands for non-toxigenic, and CD is Clostridioides difficile, and M3 is the actual strain. So it's a naturally occurring strain of C. difficile, but it's non-toxic. And what it's looking to do is to stop the recurrence of infections caused by toxic strains of C. difficile. So it's a very neat, naturally occurring solution which has been developed as a medicine. It's ready to go into phase 3s, targeting a large market. We can see the initial sales being $200 million in the US, and then building to a half a billion or bigger market opportunity. There is competition in this space, but NTCDM3 is exquisitely positioned as a naturally occurring solution, but also it's very targeted. Some of the competitors which come from fecal matter are, we believe, sort of imprecise solutions where there are safety concerns, whereas we're not limited to use here because this is a very safe, naturally occurring solution developed by Professor Dale Gerding, who's joined our scientific advisory board and a key consultant as we prepare this for its phase 3 studies, which we're looking to start in 2022. So as I said, it's naturally occurring. It's very safe, so it's almost akin to a sort of a ground cover. It can colonize the colon especially and stop the toxic strains of C. difficile proliferating. The toxic strains cause the damage the lining of the colon, leading to various side effects, but very nasty occurrences, multiple occurrences, daily basis of diarrhea, and again, often in elderly patients in hospitals, care homes. The last thing they want alongside the other ongoing treatment they have, or just general being old and perhaps a little bit frail, is a nasty gut infection. So a large market opportunity and an exquisite solution developed by Professor Gerding, which fits in also with the growing interest in the development of medicines and improved treatments of using sort of the human microbiome. We have in us billions of bacteria. And there are from some of those bacteria, there are potential solutions to improve healthcare treatments. And this is a fast-moving area of science, and we're really excited that we've moved into that space in the last 12 months with this NTCDM3 program, but also with our COVID grant-funded project in collaboration with SporeGen, which is called SporeCov. So the design for M3, this is where we are ahead of our XF73 program in terms of we've had discussions with the FDA last year. We know the study that we have to do. It's one phase 3, 800 patients, be carried out an international study, and we're looking to start that in the sort of second half of 2022. So the time this year in 2020, we're spending manufacturing clinical trial supplies, doing a transfer to a new US-based provider there, and also planning and finalising the sort of the detail of the design of this clinical study. So yes, it would take some time to get there, but this is usual as you move towards these late stage studies, and a very exciting place to be, and a very valuable project on its own. M3 has great phase 2 data, and we have that clarity from the FDA of what we need to do in the phase 3s. So a really well positioned program, which is, as I said, probably our lead program. It's 6 to 9 months ahead of XS73. And we believe it's a breakthrough. There is some competition in this space, but this has the advantage of being a relatively low cost, naturally occurring bacterial spore. So very safe to use, of course, because it resides in a very small percentage of the population. And so it's not going to cause problems in the gut microbiome, which can happen with antibiotic and artificial approaches. So we believe this fits into that sort of modern paradigm of harnessing the natural microbiome, but it has advantages compared to the fecal matter approaches, whereby it's a very exact approach. It's not a bundle of healthy feces or a selected number of strains. It's a very targeted approach. So it's drug-like in its targeted approach, albeit, though, as I said, it's a naturally occurring biotherapeutic, which we believe is definitely the way to go to resolve these nasty gut infections, which are often caused by disruptions to that natural microbiome. We also have earlier programs. We've touched on our Spore collaboration. That's government funded from an £800,000 grant we were awarded last year from Innovate UK. Not only is it addressing and has potential as a potential preventative nasal spray to reduce or stop the impact of the COVID-19 virus, but also similar coronavirus types, including influenza viruses. So it's not just the COVID-19 project. We're doing the work there with the University of Liverpool, and we will announce more data on that later in the year. But a very well positioned product. It's preventative again. It is a natural sort of biotherapeutic, so it fits into our sort of microbiome story in terms of that half of our portfolio. And we're working with very expert partners, and as I said, more data to come later in the year. And similarly with other earlier programs, we're working with various universities and medical schools. These are preclinical programs, so not really going to move the dial, particularly in terms of a listed company's evaluation. But as we've shown with XS73, we can bring clinical candidates through from this XS platform, and we're quietly confident that we can find other assets from this earlier work that's been carried out on the XF platform. And in due course, of course, we will announce that to the markets and give updates on these projects. And in terms of partnering, we are an R&D company. So at the moment, we don't talk about setting up our own sales force and becoming specialty pharma. We're very much, our strategy is to build packages of data, which we can then partner to larger international companies, maybe sometimes on a regional basis or possibly global deals. We have done one such deal with China Medical Systems, which we struck at our IPO 3 years ago, and that's going very well. We're very happy to work with CMS, and also, as I said, we've appointed a Chief Business Officer, Dr. Stephanie Buick, earlier this year, and she's leading our efforts this year as we, on the back of course, very good phase 2 data, both for XS73 and NTCDM3, we will continue discussions with partners, and at the right time, we'll look to close deals. And news flow, as we move forward, obviously we still, Q1, we've reported those positive results from XS73, and as we said, we'll now finalise plans for the phase 3, and we'll update later in the year. And in the meantime, on the other product, NTCM3, we're moving that forward through its CMC, which is sort of the manufacturing process and planning the details of the phase 3s. We're looking also for partnering deals, so the target is to close deals. Obviously, you can't guarantee those deals will be closed this year, but definitely we have a clear strategy of talking to partners and looking to negotiate where we can. And then moving forward into next year, it's looking to start phase 3s for those 2 programs, bring forward our early assets, and move the company forward. So in some ways, a sort of fairly classical biotechnology story, but what I'd say here is that what we do have is a late stage clinical asset. So we really are adding a significant value by moving forwards into that phase 3 stage of development. And in summary, Hopefully it comes across that we are looking to build a world-leading infection prevention company here. We have a great opportunity with the current assets we have, and indeed new assets that we may be able to bring in over the next year or two. We've shown that we can do that, and there are good quality assets out there. But the fact is, we have a great portfolio now with significant opportunities, and obviously that's driven by NTCDM3 and also XS73, which are really well positioned, and I think great science behind them and the great opportunities ahead. Our funding position is decent at the moment, and obviously as a listed company, we'll update on that in due course. And we think we have a great opportunity here, and strapline, prevention is better than cure. We think our approach is well positioned, and the cost benefits of using our current 2 lead products is well established, and that is the commercial and the clinical opportunity that's ahead of us. We look forward to delivering more data to prove our assets are as good as we think they are.
Neil and Sean, thank you very much. Sorry, cutting across you there, Neil and Sean. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation today. Ladies and gentlemen, please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the top right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company takes a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. So Neil and Sean, investors had the ability to pre-submit questions ahead of today's event, and I wanted to start off the Q&A with that, if I may. This question reads, please clarify the IP position regarding NTCDM3. It appears that the original patents from Professor Girding are due to expire between 2022 and 2025. Are you dependent on securing some other forms of exclusivity, for example, reference product exclusivity in the US?
No, I mean, but it is true though. The program NTCDM3 is as a program that the patent position has largely run out or is running out, but we're not relying on that intellectual property position. It's a natural biological biotherapeutic approach which fits under what is a BLA license, a biological license application, which gives you 12 years of protection on approval. Also, there's protection in the know-how of manufacturing. It's not straightforward, and it's not easy to find manufacturers who can manufacture these live bacterial spores to the required standard. So we obviously went through that in all of our due diligence. It doesn't weaken the package at all, but that is correct that the protection comes from different places than intellectual property in terms of the older registered patents.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Investors have submitted a number of questions during the presentation today, and I wanted to hand back to you so you could respond to those where it is appropriate for you to do so. Can I ask that you please read out the question and say who it is from?
Okay, thank you. I'll run a few of these. So there's a couple from Guy T regarding, says the phase 2 results for M3 look great, but this was a while ago, and Dr. Girding appears to have been trying to license this asset for a number of years. Can we offer any insights as to why nobody else picked it up? Well, there was competition. There were people interested in Professor Girding's asset. The history is that he obviously, this is his, I would say it's his life's work, but this is a major discovery and research project that he'd licensed many years ago to a large US biotech called PHARMA, they were the company that took it through its phase 1 and phase 2 studies and progressed the manufacturing and expanded the program. But they also had other assets in the orphan drug space, and this PHARMA got bought by Shire in, I believe, 2015 for several billions of dollars, and Shire bought PHARMA for their orphan drug portfolio. So this program was not a program Shire wanted to carry on with. They're not in the area of infection prevention or sort of gut infection, so they handed it back to the original owner, which is Professor Girding, and that is then he started a process of looking to find other partners, and that's where we came across him not long after we IPO back in 2017-18. So there's a bit of history there, but yes, there was some competition for various reasons. Other people dropped out, and we like to think that Dr. Girding thinks we're very expert. We're obviously a smaller company, but very focused on this area of anti-infectives, infection prevention. So we're a great fit for his asset. obviously you'd have really to talk to him about why he chose us, but we obviously negotiated hard. I know there were other companies interested, because I've spoken to their chief exec. So a competitive process, but we managed to succeed to do a deal. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Guy T also asks, do we envisage an equity fundraising in the next 12 to 24 months? And if not, can I run through some possible examples of other funding sources which could support our phase 3 assets? Well, obviously, as a listed biotechnology company on AIM, it is not unusual for companies such as ours to undertake equity funding rounds. In the next 12 to 24 months, one of our opportunities, of course, is to start 2 phase 3 studies. And we will need financing to complete those studies. They will take 2 to 3 years. We're funded, as we've said, through to sort of the back end of 2022. So how do we fund those studies? Well, we've always said since the IPO that funding our clinical studies will come from possibly from equity financings, potentially from partners, from partnering income, or possibly we could sell one of the assets to another company and have a carried interest, or indeed there is the potential, as we've shown, for grant funding as well. So the company position is that we always say there are several options for securing financing to run the operations. Obviously, as you head into later stage clinical studies, the numbers can get larger, but also the partnering opportunities increase. So in due course, we will clarify our strategy and obviously update the markets. But at the moment, we're looking at those various options. But we do obviously have sometime in 2022. We do need to, if we want to start those studies, we do need to be able to finance them. Just moving on, I think I've answered Andrew T's question around M3. And then John A asks, how many drug molecules do we have in our pipeline? Well, so we have the XF platform, XF73, as the number implies, it's a 73rd variant of that XF platform. Now that doesn't mean we have 73 other compounds ready to be developed, but we do have other drug candidates from the XF platform. The fact is, though, we have focused on XF73. It's been the most advanced, and it does have several opportunities. As we said, we've got the XF73 nasal program, a nasal gel, but we're also looking at using XF73 for other dermal infections. But yes, so we have other XF compounds earlier on in the pipeline, but also we have, of course, our other asset MTCDM3, which is not a molecule, it's a live bacterial spore, and also our Sporkov program, which is a bacterial formulation. So we have a sort of a collection of earlier assets, some of which are drugs, as it were, some of which are biotherapeutics. So hopefully that helps answer that question. John A also asked, could you tell us how long it takes on average to develop and get a drug through to commercialization? Well, yeah, I mean, it's over 10 years from original. It depends if you think from original invention, from some chemistry in a lab through to phase 3 studies. Sometimes it can be longer than 10 years. There are sometimes faster tracks for maybe in orphan drugs, rare diseases, but it takes many years, of course, and it's a very expensive process. But of course, the potential commercial returns are also significant. So this is the nature of drug development, and long timelines. But also, as you develop the data sets, you're increasing value all the time. And in terms of deal structure, with John A also asked about licensing to larger pharma. Will we get a royalty or manufacturing? Well, we don't manufacture ourselves. We outsource that, but we could keep control of that. So we could supply material to a pharma partner, and of course we would want to have a carried interest in any sales, which is classically through a royalty, but also milestones. So if sales hit certain levels, we can get a financial return. So these negotiations often start off with fairly standard structures, and then get more complicated as the negotiation starts, and the parties involved obviously have their own interests and preferences for certain terms. There's one here from John A. on our cash burn rate. What is our runway? Assuming the drugs get approval, what level of revenue profitability should shareholders be looking to see you have? Well, cash burn rate, I mean, Sean, do you want to cover that one? and our runway?
Yeah,
Already, but...
yeah. I think, as I said, we have a cash runway through to Q4 for 2022, and we had around 10 million cash at the end of December, and we also get R&D tax credits. We had around 1 million of receivable, including the balance sheet at the end of December. So what's that? 11 million of cash effectively at the end of December 2020, which takes us through to Q4 2022.
Okay, and obviously, and our cash burn rate, you can imagine a key driver of the actual spend is the clinical studies we're running. So as those clinical studies get larger, then our cash burn rate will increase. Kevin H says, is infection after surgery quite rare? And if so, does this mean the XS73 phase 3 trial would lead a very large patient population? It's a good point. I mean, infection after surgery is I sort of rare. It's perhaps rates as high as 3 to 5%, and it's that's low levels. The healthcare impact, if you're one of those patients, on the healthcare cost is significant. So, but yes, you're right. In terms of a clinical study, that's one of the factors we'll be looking at in discussions with the FDA and EMA in terms of phase 3 study size and design, because we obviously want to have a study that is reasonably fast and a sensible size. And one of the factors in that, of course, is having the study of the right size to produce the evidence that you need when you finish your phase 3 to enable the regulators to approve your product for launch, as it were. And of course, as I said, it's all around building data packages with strong evidence. So that's a point we'll be looking at in terms of the patient populations. We think there's a sensible route through this, and we'll update in due course later in the year on that discussion. But that's a fairly it's a common theme for phase 3 studies in terms of the size of the study and the evidence that's required, and a constant battle with regulators, as it were, to try and have a fast, sensibly priced study, as opposed to anything that's too large and too long and too expensive. John A asks around the COVID situation and governments being supportive regarding antibiotic resistance, and are we seeing government support increasing, and is this going to benefit the company? I mean, definitely yes, there is increased support over the recent years from governments, WHO. So antimicrobial resistance as well as COVID are sort of two of the healthcare items that will be on the agenda at the G7 if and when it happens in Cornwall later this year. So antimicrobial resistance is at the top table. Governments, as we said at the start of the presentation, do give support through supportive regulatory structures, open discussions. There are now incentives in the UK where the UK government will actually almost guaranteed to buy certain numbers of new anti-infectives coming through to support the commercial end game. We actually, with our drugs, are positioned, because we're positioned in prevention rather than treatment. We think that we hopefully we don't need such strong support, as it were, from governments, because we think our products stand alone on their own 2 feet as commercial drugs in that sort of hospital market, infection prevention market for gut infections. But definitely there is good and increasing government support coming through to support companies, be it in early stage grants or sort of commercial. What are they called? They're called pull incentives, and the push incentives are sort of the grant and perhaps clinical investment as well. But also we want pharma companies and investors to come to play in this area as well. It doesn't want to be, my view, it doesn't want to be a sector that's totally reliant on governments to be developing new medicines in this space. And John A asks, can we give investors a rough idea about how big we can, how large we can grow the company, and what level of revenue we think can be generated? Well, in the short term, revenue streams will come from partnering income in terms of milestones. Obviously, as products are launched, if our model is that we would have partners who would be selling our drugs, and we would have classically have a percentage royalty interest, depending obviously if they sell hundreds of millions and we had 10-20% carried interest, then you can see the quantities of money that would come back into the company can grow significantly. And that is difficult at this time to talk about actual numbers, but that of course is again a fairly simple classical biotechnology company model but definitely we can grow a much larger company. We've done internal analyses of the potential sort of net present value, discounted value of the cash streams from both of our lead products, and they're multiples of our current market cap. Well, obviously you'd expect us to say that. So, but definitely we think both of our lead assets have real value now. Obviously, the real proof is when they're launched in terms of sales, which generates cash flow for us and our partners. And nearer the time, we'll have better indications of what they may be. But both our analysts, we have FinCap, Mark Brewer, our sort of analyst at our Nomad and broker. Obviously, he does his own analysis, and he thinks there's great prospects for our assets. And indeed, Andy Smith at Equity Development, in his notes, also gives very strong support to what we're trying to do and the potential from our lead assets to generate value and, of course, revenues. I'm just looking through some of the questions. Could you give a concise 1-minute pitch or 3 key points why somebody should invest in you? Well, hopefully on the last slide that's still up is that we are developing a world-leading infection prevention company. It's clear there's a global need, and we have 2 late-stage clinical assets which are in this space, in this industry. As you move towards phase 3s, your chance of success, the probability of success, is increased, and therefore we're closer to some key valuation points. So on that journey, of course, we believe there's significant upside from where we are now, which potential investors or existing investors will hopefully benefit from. And I think the question, there's some questions regarding, have you considered more institutional investors to fund phase 3s? Obviously, as I said earlier, that we're looking at a variety of sources of funding for future activities, especially obviously large phase 3 studies. One component of which could be equity funding, of course. With our advisors, we would always talk to institutional and other specialist healthcare investors, and also look to involve existing investors, be they sort of private retail investors as well, through sort of appropriate structures, which is I think is what we did at the last funding as well.
Neil and Sean, thanks so much again. I think you've addressed the questions you can from investors, and of course the company will review all questions submitted by investors today and will publish those answered on the Investor Meet Company platform. Neil, perhaps I could just hand back to you real quickly and ask you to wrap up, after which I'll redirect investors to give you feedback.
Thank you. No, thanks everyone for the questions and for listening. Obviously, happy to take questions separately. Please contact the company via our website. We will look to update with news, of course, during this year, but we have had a great 2020 and a very strong start to 2021, and we're very excited about the period ahead, and look forward to talking again and updating you through news announcements as well. So thanks a lot, and all the best for the rest of the year.
Gentlemen, thanks once again. Thanks for updating the investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you access the meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear, but if you access the meeting via the link sent to you by email, you will simply be asked to log back in to submit your feedback. On behalf of the management team of Destiny Pharma PLC, we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's presentation, and thank you and good afternoon.